Everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm James Lovejoy. I'm a content researcher in Brandwatch's New York City office. Today I'm with Joe Pilla. Hi, Joe.
Hey, how are you, James?
I'm good, thanks. How you doing?
Good.
Great. So today we're going to be presenting about social intelligence in the luxury fashion industry. And actually, Joe, do you want to just give us a quick bit of background about yourself before we begin?
Sure. I'm the VP of Social Insights here at Zenith Ops Media, and we focus a lot on earned media and campaign measurement and looking at sentiment and different stories around social campaigns, and we work closely with Brandwatch to accomplish that. So James and I had a few conversations about this report, and he invited me to participate and chime in when he needs me to.
Great, thanks, Joe. So like I said, we're going to be talking about luxury fashion, and a lot of the concepts and the data from in this presentation are from the Insights on the Luxury Fashion Industry report we released a few months ago. But there are a lot of insights that are developed specifically for this presentation, so we'll be sure to point those out throughout. What we're going to be covering is we're going to start by talking about why the fashion industry has sort of hesitated on adopting, strong social strategies. And then we're going to go into social intelligence applications, talking about how social media and social intelligence can support different ends of a business. And then we'll go straight into a couple of those use cases, talking about audience analysis, who is your audience, what are they saying about your brand, and then we're going to go into competitor analysis and understanding the industry and your competitors through social data. And then lastly, we're going to talk about influencer campaigns and how a campaign does and does not affect your business. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'd love for you to tweet about the discussion. You can use hashtag BrandWatchTips when you do it. And just so that you all know, there's going to be a recording and a copy of the slides within 1 to 2 business days after this presentation is done. Just a bit of background about Brandwatch. We have over 1,000 clients, over 30 Fortune 100, and we now have offices in 6 major cities. So before I go into the insights, I just want to go over some background of the state of social within the fashion industry. I talked a little bit about how these brands have been hesitant to join social. I was trying to figure that out when I was starting this research, and I came upon this great research from Deloitte, and they made the argument that the reason luxury fashion has been hesitant is really because of competing interests between luxury fashion and social media. So if you think about luxury fashion brands like Chanel or Dior, traditionally they're a bit more, they're expensive brands, which makes them somewhat exclusive. And traditionally they've had like a very strong control over their branding and what they put out there. They're a bit more reserved and careful with how they present themselves. Now, if you think about social media, on the other hand, social media is everywhere. It's extremely easy for anyone to join. The access is very low, and the conversation is it's a bit more stream of conscious. It's a bit more, what am I thinking in this exact moment, as opposed to more of a calculated presence. So when you think about sort of these two areas, there's a bit of a disconnect. Fashion brands have been sort of afraid that if they join social, they might lose some of that control over their brand, as the non-exclusivity of social allows people to talk about them however they like. And we see this in a lot of the major brands. You look at DKNY, Hermes, Rolex, and DKNY has 40 tweets, Hermes 5, and Rolex, their tweets are protected. I've actually asked to follow them, and I'm waiting a response from them still. Let's see. So the thing is, though, that there is a bit of a crisis, right? Despite them not being active, they've sort of lost their brand exclusivity anyways, because the audience is talking about them regardless. Right now, in the analysis we looked at, These brands maintain 0.37% of the conversation surrounding them online. So you can really see that the audience is sort of dominating what's being said about these brands, and they've lost that control over how they're presented online. On the other hand, there's a strong opportunity here. So with that less than 1% of the conversation they do control, there is a great opportunity to sort of steer the direction of the conversation, and we see that through the amount of replies and retweets that the audience offers up. It's 42% of the conversation comes from that, and by offering interesting and engaging content, they can sort of steer the direction of what's being said. And the other thing is, through their products, they can steer the direction of what's being said about them. So, indeed, we think about these brands, and in truth, they have been hesitant to join social, but they are actually well positioned to succeed if you think about it. People are passionate about fashion. Fashion brands already understand their audiences and are already building very tight-knit communities offline. And then fashion brands and their campaigns are already generating significant social interest and conversation online. So yeah, we created this index, which you can find on our website, and this is actually the September 1st to September 30th index. We'll be updating the scores each month. But like I said, we came out with this report, and Joe got in contact with us and said, "Oh, this is really interesting," and he had a couple interesting insights about some of the brands. I know he talked about Burberry and Chanel. And Joe, do you want to tell us a little bit about those brands?
Sure. Since this is the September data, we were originally looking at the August data, which was in the original report. And I think at that time, I think the Calvin Klein brand was number 3, but Chanel, Dior, Calvin were all pretty much at the top of the list here. And as we looked at the different components of the fashion index, looking at social visibility, general visibility, net sentiment, reach, growth, and engagement content, we could see that being just the 1 month, that this was a very fluid list, and we wanted to look more closely into what was really going on. And it became clear that in the case of Calvin Klein, they came in third because of their relationship with Justin Bieber and how he had a new video out. He had his waistband showing in the video, as well as having some shots online in the water, which we've just basically seen that he was at the beach, but he was filming a music video. So all of this was going on during the reporting period, and it gave that brand particularly active engagement for the month. And then as we look to the next month, we see how Chanel is number 1, and we anticipate that Chanel is going to be number 1 for quite some time because, like James has already said, some of the brands don't really need to do anything in order to be talked about on social channels. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for us as we looked at this data, in that the brands really do not control what's being said about them. And even when they don't do anything, relationship with a spokesperson like Calvin Klein, or just the legacy brand equity with your brand like Chanel, you're always going to have some form of conversation. I think this is an excellent way to kind of understand who's being discussed. And we talk about luxury fashion, we don't always think of every one of these brands, like Tommy Hilfiger in particular. He, again, is on here because in September and August, they had launched the Rafael Nadal underwear line, and it was highly publicized throughout the U.S. Open. So we would anticipate this might fall off over time, but then who's coming up? What new launches is out in the marketplace, and then what's going on with these individual brands. And the last thing I wanted to say was about Burberry, because Burberry is an interesting brand. They have similar cachet to a Chanel or a Dior, but they're actively engaging in social with Instagram, YouTube, and many different programs, as we did a little background research. So Burberry is more like the brand that is actively wanting to be discussed, whereas Chanel is just sitting back and people just talk about it. So there's a bit of a push and a pull going on between what you're doing and what everyone is doing around you. And that was kind of the takeaway that in the conversation that James and I had for this particular page.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Joe. And like Joe was saying, that some of these brands are running some very successful campaigns. So Dior has enlisted Rihanna to support their campaign, and we can just see here how some of their activity on social media through Rihanna has evoked interest in this category. We can see Edward Barsamian, style editor at Vogue, tweeting about it. We can see Nina Garcia, a fashion journalist. And then at the bottom there, we can see this Women's Wear Daily article that's talking about Rihanna at Paris Fashion Week. So this all drives the question, what is driving social success? And I think Joe made a really great point that it's a little bit different for each brand. I mean, you look at Chanel, and it's almost their name, without any sort of campaign influence, almost their name that's just driving so much conversation. But then there are brands like Burberry that will have to run, some elaborate campaigns to get the same amount of attention that they want. So we're trying to figure out, what drives social success for brands, and how can they sort of build upon that, if they don't have the name of Chanel. And what we came up with is that it's social intelligence, which is sort of understanding what's happening online and being able to inform all of your decisions based on the conversations, the organic conversations that people are having online about your brands. So we talk about social intelligence, and that term is often misused, but just to sort of provide some context, here are some of the use cases that we talk about when we think about social intelligence. And the other day I had a conversation with a media monitoring exec at one of the largest banks in America, and she had this quote, which I thought was really poignant. She said, "Tell me what your goals are, then I can tell you how social will support that." And basically what she was getting at when I talked to her is that she goes around and she finds out, what are the decisions you're trying to make, and then she finds a way that social data can sort of provide some sort of information or some sort of context to help them, guide that decision. But she starts with the question, and then, finding an answer sort of builds itself almost. Today, in talking about fashion, luxury fashion, we're going to focus on these 5 use cases. So it's campaign measurement, competitor intelligence, consumer insights, influencer marketing, product development, and feedback. And I want you to think about these as I go through some of the insights and the research from the report, and think about how some of these insights could guide decisions that you might have to make for these use cases. So the first area I want to talk about is sort of knowing your audience and knowing how, who your audience is, how that will help inform campaigns and also product creation. So the first thing, we examine this research here looks at Givenchy, and we examine the gender of the brand, of people talking about the brand. And just so you know, BrandWatch automatically populates this demographic information as well as others when you're tracking a brand. But this provides insight on your online audience, and it lets you know, when you're reaching out online, it says, who are the people that I'm connecting with, who are the people that are interested in our content. And what I find really interesting is when you pair this data alongside your sales data, you can say, how does this compare with the products we're selling? For example, are we reaching more females online than we are in our stores, and why is that the case? What is the content that's driving that high female prevalence? Again, here we can look at interests broken down. The platform allows you to look at both interest and profession. Here we see Givenchy's, the interest around Givenchy conversation. And what I find really interesting is that you can sort of build a story by looking at what people found interesting. So obviously fashion is the strongest interest for Givenchy conversation, but then we see that music is one of the largest bars there too. So we might find that interesting and look in to say, well, why is that? And we can see there by clicking into music, we can see, what are the tweets from people that are interested in music. And it happens to be that Nicki Minaj performed at Milan Fashion Week for Givenchy. So you can see how we can build a story and start to understand why it is that a certain brand drives interest among certain demographics. The other thing we can do within the platform, and this is really the meat and the power of the platform, is that we can create fully customizable categories to separate the conversation really any way we want. So in the research that we released, we looked at accessories, clothing items, colors, and footwear. And you can find that all in the report online. And then the thing that's really interesting is that you can analyze this within a single brand, or you can compare it across brands, or you can compare categories against each other. So I can say, how does Prada's boots compare to Calvin Klein's? Or, we can look at which colors are most popular for Givenchy. And that's exactly what we've done here. We've looked at from September 1st to September 30th, we've looked at which, when people talk about Givenchy's products, which colors are they mentioning? And we see that black is the most popular. We can click into that and find out exactly why that is and what products those are. But then we might say, well, it's interesting that green is the third most popular. I might not have expected that. And again, we can click in and say, oh, that's because of these oval magnet earrings, and that's because Dara Style picked that up. Then we also might look at this and say, well, why is blue so low? Maybe this is an area that we want to, expand upon, or an area that we want to grow. Now, by expanding these analyses across brands, we can get a better sense of our competitive positioning and see where we fit in the context of the larger industry. So here, taken from the report, is a breakdown of gender across a broad range of brands. Now, this is helpful for a company like Givenchy, who can look at where they fit in the context of their competitors. So they may say, we want to be targeting predominantly women, but maybe not so much as DKNY, who's ranked very high in conversation from women. And then another thing we've looked at is interest group. Again, this is taken from the report, and we can say, how do we compare with our competitors for the interests of people of the conversation we're driving? So this looks at 3 brands: Tommy Hilfiger, Dior, and Burberry. And we can see here what's interesting. Again, we can build stories and see, well, that's interesting that Tommy Hilfiger is so popular among sports fans. Now, why is that? And we can see that, oh, that's right. There was the U.S. Open during that time, and Tommy Hilfiger enlisted Rafael Nadal to support them. And obviously, that boosted a lot of the conversation around Tommy Hilfiger. And then we can look at music and see, oh, that's right, Dior enlisted Rihanna, and maybe that's why that's driving so much interest among that group. Now, another thing we can do is just say, we can look at our competitors and say, is anyone else driving conversation in music? And if not, maybe that's an area that we can sort of tap and then build a niche out. Now, here's another category we've set up, and we can look at, this compares footwear across various brands and finds how prevalent are certain mentions of certain types of footwear when people are talking about these brands. So we can see here that Prada and Givenchy boots are much more prevalent than most of their competitors. And again, we can look into that and say, why was Prada so popular? What were driving that conversation? And then for Givenchy, how does our offering compare, and why didn't we drive as much traffic around that area? This helps us say, what are the trends for this month? We might look back and say, oh, there wasn't that much conversation around heels, so maybe heels are not popular this month, or maybe brands are just not pushing for heels at this time. So we can help sort of build that dialogue and sort of understand what's happening. Now, we were looking at this data, and I think it was an analysis of clothing items, and we found, I think Joe mentioned earlier, we found that underwear was one of the leading clothing items above, suits and jackets, etc. And what we found is that, it was largely driven by Calvin Klein um, alongside Justin Bieber. And so, yeah, as Joe mentioned earlier, we were having this conversation where we were like, Justin Bieber is driving all of this traffic. But so, what does that mean for the brand? And Joe, do you remember? Do you remember what we were talking about at that time?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was unexpected was this idea that here he is as the spokesperson, and regardless of whether or not he's in an advertisement or there's a campaign active, whatever he's doing, he's driving conversation between the brand and himself in a way that benefits the brand. This earned media element is kind of an intangible, and the fact that he's constantly wearing the underwear and he makes it very visible. It's kind of an added cachet that keeps the brand in top of mind. It keeps as a pop culture reference. And then with this thing I just read this morning, apparently when he was out on the beach in August, it was filming a scene from the music video, which I don't think was discussed at that point. So now what we saw in August will probably come back into the consciousness today and the next day and over the next couple of days, and all of those posts will have a secondary appeal and then get replayed, and basically we'll probably see in October there'll be a big push. And I don't know that there's any Calvin Klein billboards or magazine ads or online ads active at the moment, but his celebrity is just a constant provider for social commentary, and he's become well linked with this brand, much more so than maybe Rihanna is with Dior. She's obviously known for Dior, but you don't necessarily always put two and two together because she's wearing different outfits every day, different costumes every day, and it's not necessarily always the Dior and Rihanna as compatible as maybe Justin Bieber and Calvin Klein in the underwear space.
Exactly, and one of the things we were talking about too was sort of Justin Bieber was driving all this conversation, but one of the questions was sort of so what, and in a sense, how is that changing the business? Because that's really what we want to know, is sort of, what this conversation between Justin Bieber and Calvin Klein really means for Calvin Klein. And we often see that, community managers are evaluated on how much conversation they're driving often. But the question is sort of, is that really going back and affecting the business? So to sort of spell out that idea, I wanted to just compare the effects of two different influencers on two different brands. So here we're comparing Chanel and Dior. And just for context, we can see that Dior is a much larger brand than Chanel, reaching a much bigger group of people, and that's sort of their motive there. And this is who we want to look at for influencers. So we've got Cara Delevingne and Rihanna on Dior, and I would just want to compare sort of their reach. So Cara Delevingne has 4.11 million Twitter followers. Rihanna has 52.2 million Twitter followers. She's actually the 6th most followed Twitter profile in the world. I think a few spots behind Obama and 4 spots behind Justin Bieber, of course. But I want to look at. Oh, sorry. I just want to take a step back. There is a reason why Rihanna's support would be more expensive, and that's because of just how many followers she has. So, but what I want to look at here is, when you think about the influence they will make, Rihanna will naturally drive more conversation. And this goes back to what we were talking about with Justin Bieber, the question of sort of so what and what does this mean in business terms. And what we want to ask is, how many of those people reading and retweeting Rihanna or Cara's tweets are actually potential buyers? Do they actually care about the brand, or are they simply Are they simply people that they see Justin Bieber's tweet and they will retweet anything that he puts out there? So what we want to look at is both this overlap here and say, how well is the fit between the influencer and the brand themselves, and then we also want to look at where they overlap, because that's going to be essentially, those are fans of the influencer that will never be interested in the brand or potentially never interested in the brand. So depending on your goals, that could be people talking about your brand that don't really fit your target and that aren't really ever going to purchase your products.
And James, I want to interject here because this is one of the things we talked about as well. The idea that Cara, the model, is so affiliated and associated with fashion, and Chanel being the premier fashion brand that it is, who has so much success in, it could be considered a mature brand, but here you have Cara, who's a young model. Her entire persona is about fashion, that the affinity between her and this brand is a lot more specific in a sense, whereas Rihanna has music and so many interests beyond the fashion category and such a vast mass following that certainly she does bring a great deal of attention, but it's not always the customer attention that Dior might want. It just may be, outsiders just looking in that really don't have any kind of an engagement with the Dior brand, but they're so well invested in Rihanna and her new song and her new music and her concert. But when it comes to the fashion, it's not just Dior that she's affiliated with, because she is wearing so many different brands throughout her day and her appearances and other things. She may wear Dior in the advertising campaign. She may wear Dior primarily on the red carpet, but she's also associated with so many different styles that there can be more opportunities for her with this brand, but there's definitely other brands that she's involved with just as a basis of her celebrity.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think that's a really great point to make. So the question then, as someone trying to pick an influence and measure how that influencer is affecting your following, the question then is, how do we figure that out? And like I said before, I go back to this quote. It says, "Tell me what your goals are, and I can tell you how social will support that." So as we've seen throughout the analysis here, you can take a look at the interests, the gender, the professions, and really break down the conversations surrounding any brand. You can also do this surrounding any influencer. So we could do this, that same analysis, we could run that on Rihanna and say, how do the interest groups and professions and the gender and conversations align with the people that we're trying to target? So we might look at Justin Bieber and say, well, 80% of the conversation around Justin Bieber is female. So if we're trying to reach males with this Calvin Klein underwear brand, maybe that's not reaching our target. Or on the other hand, maybe we want males to see females talking about Justin Bieber's Calvin Klein ad. But that understanding those goals is going to be crucial, and having ways to sort of measure how the influencer is affecting your audience, that's going to be crucial. So yeah, we've covered a lot of different areas today, and I just want to quickly review sort of where we've been. So fashion has been slow to adopt social, yet they are well positioned for it. Social intelligence can inform across the business. As we've seen, tell me what your goals are, and I can tell you how social will support that. One of the first steps to having a social intelligent strategy is to know your audience, identifying gender and profession, but then really digging into customizable categories so that you can sort of break apart that conversation and find the very specific stories that help you understand more about your brand. Knowing your competitors so that you can understand where your brand fits in the larger scheme and understand the stories that are driving the interest around their brand. And then lastly, the idea that volume of conversation is not always the amount of new business. So you should be informed and aware of whether your campaigns and the influencers you're bringing on whether those campaigns are broad or whether they're targeted to the specific people that are interested in buying your product or maybe interested in buying your product. I believe that was all I had today, and now we're going to be taking a few questions. We have one here. Can you review what net sentiment means or represents? So yes, in the index, net sentiment is essentially the ratio of positive to negative mentions. Um, and we exclude our natural language processing, excludes sort of neutral statements. And just for a bit of background, the Brandwatch's net sentiment is known as being conservative. So over the course of tens of thousands of mentions, we take guesses on fewer mentions than most of our competitors, but when we do take guesses, we're more often correct. The next question is, how often will the Brandwatch Social Index on the website be replaced? Yep, so the goal is to have these up every month, and so we'll be updating the scores for each industry every month, but the long-term vision is to expand this to broader industries, add new brands, and by the way, if there's a brand that you'd like to see on the index, feel free to tweet at Brandwatch, and we'd be happy to add them. And the other thing we're going to be doing is regularly releasing blog posts on sort of, we can't release the full algorithm, but we want to talk about sort of the philosophy behind it and let everyone know sort of what goes into making those evaluations and how we come up with the scores. From Twitter, how do we measure an influencer's impact on your social media audience? Yeah, so what you can do is divide the conversation. So if you're looking for example, how Justin Bieber is affecting your brand, what you can do is, let's say you're Calvin Klein, you can separate conversation that mentions Justin Bieber and Calvin Klein together, and then find how that campaign, both, obviously the volume of mentions of Justin Bieber in relation to Calvin Klein, but you can also say, what's the gender of people talking about those two topics together, and then what's the gender of people talking about just Calvin Klein without Justin Bieber, so that you can say, how does that campaign fit into, fit into our goals. And Joe, we have one here for you. It says, you have discussed established fashion brands. How would a new fashion brand differ in terms of strategy and measuring success?
Well, I think a new brand is going to have to find a way to break through all the conversation that goes on just naturally amongst all of the legacy brands. And I think things like tapping into Instagram or influencers with some of these new young people that are making recommendations to teens and millennials is a really good way to get your product in front of people that have an influence who want to try something new, because we're seeing in our research a lot of thirst for new products, and also just, when someone who you relate to on a YouTube channel talks to you and you follow them because they have an affinity, maybe they look like you, maybe they talk like you, maybe they live near you, and they have a way of just endorsing the product without really endorsing it, we're seeing that that's a great way to break through and get some attention. And when it comes to measuring it, that's a really great question, because depending on the different channel you use can determine exactly what metric you use. We have a lot of conversations going on here about viewability and identifying impressions. So it really just depends on which channels you use to gain which measurement for your program. Hopefully that made sense.
I think that does. Thanks, Joe. And you have another one. Do you think that high street brands like Zara and the fact that they're so active has played a part in getting luxury brands involved in social media? If so, in what way?
Well, first of all, what we've seen in our research and the clients that we have here is that the luxury brands, the very, very high-end luxury brands, are waiting to see what the other guys are doing sometimes, because they don't want to mess with the exclusivity and the overall brand equity of their brand. They just do anything that could possibly damage the brand. And I think Zara, the retailer Zara, was the brand you were mentioning. I think Zara is, that's kind of a mid to high end brand, I would say. They're everywhere in the country. There's not necessarily the overall exclusivity to that, but I think being in the public consciousness and what I'm not that familiar with Zara, to be honest, but I think what they're doing, I actually don't know what they're doing, so I need a little help with that, actually. Sorry.
Yep. And are there any more questions here? Nope. It looks like that's all for questions. Thank you all for joining us. And if you have anything else you want to follow up with, feel free to tweet at BrandWatch, and you can download our report at brandwatch.com as well if you're interested in seeing some of the research there. Joe, thanks a lot for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, sure. It was my pleasure.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks.